here's an irony, which I assume you know, but if not, there's more opposition to what Israel is doing in Gaza inside Israel than is allowed in the United States. Bizarre.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is, in Israel, there are newspapers on the street, there are demonstrations, there are marches in the university by significant numbers of people, including newspapers, unions, political parties, against this war, stop the war, against Netanyahu. We can't do that here. Harvard University president, I'm not for her or against her, she's gone. She's gone as one of the sacrificial lambs because it is too troubling here to have passionate disagreement with Israel, to say it crudely or in poor taste or etc., or even anti-Semitically. What's that about? What the world are you going to do? What is this? It's also, I mean, it has to be understood. The African-American community here, their sympathies are the other way. If you go to Ireland today, you'll see that the majority of opinion in Ireland is with the Palestinians. What's that about? Answer. You know what that's about? Because Palestine and Israel strikes Irish people like Britain and Ireland. A lot. Whoa. The point is not here to quarrel with the parallels. That's not what's relevant here. What's relevant here is enough people see it that you've got to take all of this into account. It's not that you have to agree with it. You don't. But to pretend it's not there, to pretend it's all dismissible, you can't do that. That perspective will come back and bite you in the rear end just when you were hoping to sit down. And you won't be able to sit down because it'll hurt. And this seems to me so obvious that, let me give you another way of getting at it. And I think we touched on this once before. When I was a student at Harvard, at Stanford, and at Yale, my three schools that I attended, I would raise my hand in class and I would ask a question connected in some way to the Marxist tradition, which I was then learning. Not learning in the schools, they didn't offer me any help. But I would ask a question, and it would often be more or less, here's the Marxist interpretation of something. What do you think, Professor whatever? And I had, broadly speaking, two kinds of answers. Some of them came from good teachers, and I had those, and some of them came from your normal average teacher. The first kind was, that's not an appropriate question for this class. You should ask that, and then they'd give me some name of some other professor or some other department. I should go do that. By the way, early in my college career, I actually did that and discovered I got the same answer wherever I went next, so that this was a waste of time. The second was much more nuanced. The second kind of answer was brief, often not quite to the point, but that's not what's interesting. What was interesting were the eyes of the man or woman that was the professor. And the eyes said to me, please don't pursue this. They were eyes, if I had to attach a word to the facial expression, fear. And a few times, especially with good teachers, I went and pursued. I had office hours, so I could sit down one-on-one with the professor and ask, which I did. And here's the answer I got, not usually the first time, second or third time. If I respond to your question, I am going to get a reputation around here of being interested in, concerned with Marx and Marxism. I can't do that. And you know something? Even though I was 20 years old and I'm not that savvy, I understood what they were telling me. It is not good for their career. It just isn't. And they basically said to me, if you want to discuss those things, come to office hours. I'll talk to you about it. But don't do that in class. Don't do that in class. And I learned, and I just want you to remind you, 10 years of my life, 20 semesters, 2 a year for 10 years, Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. And that's what I got. I got the peak, self-defined peak of higher education in the country, so overwhelmed by the Cold War that they didn't just hate Russia and all of that, communism. They weren't going to learn it. They weren't going to read it. They weren't going to think of it. Their loyalty took the form of pretending that they had no obligation, neither as a teacher nor just as an informed citizen, to have some sense. Who are these people? No, they're bad. They're bad. And the few who defied the taboo, they would talk to me in their office hours, but not beyond that. You know, that's why I'm going to overstate it. Part of the difficulty this country has now is the product of 70 years of that kind of Cold War mentality. That's why you can still live in a world of right and wrong ways of eating or dressing or thinking or dancing or theorizing. You can't handle, we do it differently. And that doesn't make me good and you bad or vice versa. We're all complicated and all very hard for Americans. Very, very hard. Saddam Hussein was defined as Hitler. Putin is defined as Hitler. Or Stalin might be better. And Stalin was defined as Hitler. It's just, you have to demonize the bad guys. Look, and and then there's this surprise by the liberals who practice this as bad as anybody. They are very offended when the conservatives are so under pressure in this country that they begin talking about the liberals as if they were Stalinists. They apply the same divisive horror demonization. Look at Mr. Trump. He gets up on the podium and he runs off. We're going to get the communists, the Democrats, the socialists, the trans. He's got them all lumped together in a kind of collective demonization in which they become synonymous one with the other, indistinguishable except for their common quality of utter evil. Wow. Wow. This is not just some peculiar politician. Mr. Trump, is a creature of the moment. But that moment is the historical culmination. And so he picks up the lingo and the spirit and says back to people what they're saying to him. And there's a bond that's made there, which you could see in Iowa last night. It's a remarkable. And I think you see this very, very badly played out in that bizarre factoid that it's harder to be criticizing Israeli policy in the United States than it is in Israel. It's just extraordinary for a country that is effectively at war. It has failed. This government has failed to persuade an enormous part of Israeli society that what it is doing is the right thing to do. And in my perspective, that's lucky for Israel that they have that they have some debate, some dissension. It's not conducted at the level I would have hoped, but whereas in this country, it's extraordinary. I've been at places and people can't articulate their point of view because they're interrupted as if they were spreading moral leprosy in the room by saying something critical of Israel or positive about Palestine. It's just, what kind of behavior? You would call it childish, except it's dangerous in a way that childish things usually aren't.